Well, good morning. I wanted to just take a couple of seconds before Rick comes up to really stress how important the safety talks are and how Cirrus really does look at this. Now, when Alan and I started building airplanes, and certainly when we started on the SR20, everything we did to the airplane was around building an airplane that is safer. That is our goal. Things that we brought to the airplane since then is to drive safety. And our numbers are only average. So everything that we do to the airplane doesn't change the outcome. So what we want to talk about today, Rick is going to talk about, I'm going to talk about later this afternoon, really is, you know, we don't have to debate the numbers. The numbers are what they are. I want to debate the conclusions. How do we change the outcomes? How do we truly make this industry safer? How do we make our customers safer? And that is the biggest driver for us. Now, if we have 150 pilots in this room, and you look around, in the next 5 years, someone won't be in here from an airplane accident. And those are the numbers that we can change. Now, I say that and I'm talking to the choir here because the COPA numbers truly are quite a bit different. And what we have to do as Cirrus is learn from COPA and make sure that our entire fleet equals COPA's performance. And then as a member of this industry, we have to get the entire industry to equal COPA's numbers. So I just want to stress that safety is what this is all about. You know, the behaviors of what we do is what determines safety. We're starting that this morning with Rick, and he's going to come up and maybe some of the numbers will be sobering. I will cover them again later at 3 o'clock. And we want to debate the conclusions. We want to debate how do we really change the outcome of these numbers. That's what we're looking for. That's what we need to learn as a company, and of course we need to learn as an industry. So with that being said, Rick Beach, come on up, and he's going to tell us what he has learned. And hopefully we learn from that, Rick.
So, first I want to acknowledge the people in the room, the people on the internet. At this time of day, it's very late in Europe, and it's late in Europe, it's really late in Australia, or very early. Anyway, it's interesting how widespread the interest is in what COPA has been doing in safety. And I'm going to do things a little differently. I've been doing these kinds of safety talks for a long time now to the COPA community. And I'm going to give you kind of snapshots of 4 different things. First, I want to talk about the safety statistics, but in a slightly different way than I think Dale was talking about. There's some interesting twists. There's still way too many accidents. We know people that have died. This is not good. We know people that have been seriously injured. That's not good. We know that it gets across in the national news in some cases, but mostly they're not COPA members that are involved in those accidents. We'll talk about that. Once the crash is over, the lawsuits begin, and some of you know I spent some time attending a lawsuit, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the Bechtel versus Sandel case and some of the things that I learned from observing that. And then a month ago, the National Transportation Safety Board convened a safety forum on general aviation and getting at what can we do, what can the community do to reduce the accident rate in general aviation. And then I want to talk about the COPA safety culture, which is a testament to all the people in the room, frankly. A year ago, I gave a presentation. It's been on the web. I'm very gratified that the hour-long presentation has been viewed 1,400 times, 1,400 times. We had about 150 people in the room in Colorado Springs, about the same number on the internet. And I showed these 2 slides. In my judgment, 93 of all the people that have died could have survived. 93 people could have survived if the pilot or the occupants had used the parachute. And if you looked at all the parachute pulls, nobody had died when it was pulled within the design parameters. This year, that number has gone up by another 13 people. And when you look at the parachutes, when you look at the parachute, it hasn't changed. So the story is still the same. You have a choice of flying with the anticipation that something you've been planning for, you're trained for, you're certified to be able to do, but you also have the safety innovations in the Cirrus aircraft and you can plan to use it. 106 people perished when they could have survived, I believe, and 0 people have died when the pilots or the occupants used the parachute. At the National Transportation Safety Board, they presented some figures which started me thinking about, wait a minute, people fly Cirrus aircraft a lot. And they came up with a distinction which has been around for a long time, but I haven't been thinking about, and that is the distinction of pleasure flying and business flying. Personal flying for pleasure and flying for business. Now, I presume many people in the audience fly their Cirrus for business. And the charts show that the flying time over the last decade had been steadily going down. And at the bottom, you see a kind of gold-colored, yellow-colored line of the Cirrus fleet, and its hours kind of climbing. Well, when you take a closer look at it, the Cirrus fleet is now approaching about 10% of all the personal and business flying in North America per the FAA safety survey. They do a survey of general aviation and air taxi. They get an estimate of what the numbers are. If we're really flying about 1 million hours a year in the whole Cirrus fleet, that's almost 10% of all of the general aviation flying that's happening. Now, the NTSB investigators assigned a type of operation to each of the accidents. And so I just sort of lumped them all together, and it's like all. There's a lot, 88 of them. But when you break out the ones that they've assigned types to, 67 of them are for pleasure flying, or personal flying. 6 are for business, meaning that the investigator concluded that the purpose of that trip was consistent with a business purpose. No, you weren't just going to a football game, but you were actually going to a customer, or you were returning an airplane, or you were doing something for a business purpose. 4 of the accidents were instructional flights, in which there was an instructor on the plane and something bad happened. 2 of them were ferry flights, one in Greenland going to Europe, and the other in Germany going in Europe. 1 cargo flight and 1 Part 135 flight. So it's interesting that we see a kind of similar breakdown in terms of the difference between the purpose being personal pleasure flying, having many more hours and many more accidents, and some accidents in the business, instructional, ferry, cargo, and Part 135. When you look at the frequency of accidents for the Cirrus fleet, I plot it by quarter, because that's when I get the production numbers, and of course I've got the dates of each of the accidents. And you can see it's generally gone up because we had more planes, but generally trending down, except for something happened in October, November, December last year. 8 accidents, 3 in one day, or within 24 hours. There's a big spike. If we got that spike to go down a little bit, we'd have a really interesting trend here in the direction that everybody would like it to be, fewer accidents. So I also took a look, and when you add them up, there were 16 fatal accidents last year, 4 so far this 6 months into 2012. So it's like 20 in 18 months, 1 a month. If we could just tamp down that big spike, we'd be making good progress. I took a look at where COPA members showed up on this, and so there are little white bars on there. You can sort of see it on the screen. There was a period of time when there were lots of accidents and very few COPA members involved, 1 in 2003. And And then there's kind of a COPA member, COPA member, COPA member, while the numbers go up and down. And then it starts to fade out, and it's faded out so that fewer COPA members are involved in fatal accidents in the last year or so. One in the last 15 months, and 22 of 88 overall. Fortunately, the Cirrus is equipped with a parachute system that recovers the whole airplane from a bad situation, and many people have survived as a result of that. We had two recently in 2012. Dick McLaughlin will speak about his when we're in this morning session. And the Cirrus sales rep was flying an SR20 in Brazil and had a fuel engine problem, and he pulled the parachute. Both of them credit COPA discussions for the realization of how you can plan for the use of the parachute. And in 2011, there was actually a fatal accident involving the parachute in Carrollton, Texas, a plane smart plane, and in New Orleans, an SR-20 had engine problems, turned around and tried to get back, and was flying over Lake Pontchartrain and ditched under parachute. So at this point, Craig, you got two of those. I'd like to recognize people who have pulled the parachute, and so I know there's a couple of them. Jerry, you're on the spot. Please stand up. Jerry Morris pulled the parachute over West Virginia in a Cirrus perspective. Now, Jerry, I don't want people to get the wrong impression. I'm glad you're here, and I hope the applause is appreciated because you're here. It's not about what the situation was he got into. It's about he pulled the parachute, he and his wife can have dinner. I mean, that's the outcome that I'm hoping people walk away with. I'm not trying to applaud his decision-making or his flight skills or what, sorry. What I'm trying to say, I guess, is I'm glad that you appreciate that Jerry's here. And it's possible because of the safety innovations and his decision to act. The other person is Dick McLaughlin, and I haven't seen him in the last few minutes, but we'll get him. Oh, there he is. He's wearing a different shirt. Craig, Dick McLaughlin will speak later, and so we'll get the full Dick story. I just want you to know that, are there any other people that I don't recognize that have been in the situation of pulling the parachute? All right, I don't see any more hands standing up. Thank you, Dick. Thank you, Jerry, for being examples of people we can talk to after one of these accidents. I want to say a little bit about the accident rate. Now that we're talking about personal and business flying, we have something different to compare. The green line that I put up there against the Cirrus 12-month and 36-month accident rate has always been talked about as the general aviation fatal accident rate. But listening to the NTSB, that includes instructional flying. That includes corporate and executive flying. Those accidents, not many of them, but there's a lot of hours in there. When you take those out of it, and you look at just personal and business flying, that's the blue line. Wait a minute, that started out at just under 2, and has been rising and is more about 2.38 the last year they have a number. We're at 1.15, and we're kind of making the marketing claim that it's about the same as the total general aviation rate. But crap, it's like half of the personal and business flying rate. There's some interesting things going on in the Cirrus fleet, let alone the COPA memberships. So one of the other things I do in my spare time is work with the accident data to create a visualization. My background's in computer graphics. I love doing this stuff. It's fun, and it's often revealing what you can learn from seeing something visually as opposed to reading or looking at the charts, reading a narrative. So for instance, a couple of years ago now, I created an animation. The first set of data that I had, which was for Luna, New Mexico, his pitot iced up, his airspeed went to X's, he pushed the nose over to get speed. Boy, did he get speed. The data shows 224 knots. He gets a terrain alert, pulls up, pulls the parachute. There's the tail drop. This is speeded up 6 times so that you can get in 1 minute what he went through in 6 minutes. And then he essentially descends into the trees. It was a fun thing to do. Recently, I got the data for the Deltona training accident in which the Delta Connection Academy at the time, 2 commercial pilots, one acting as an instructor, were going through the, and Martin, you need the sound for this, thanks. And they're doing slow flight. They're about 3,500 feet. You hear the engine noise? Listen to the engine noise. All right, pull it up, slow flight, flaps, and see the stall characteristics of the Cirrus? You still have aileron control. Those 2 people pulled the parachute just prior to ground impact. How long did it take them? It's a really hard thing to watch. Even I'm standing up here and I created this months ago. They had 25 seconds in that spin. The engine speed didn't change. They didn't get control of the aircraft. And they didn't pull the parachute until just about hitting the trees. It's like, damn, they had a really good chance of being able to survive that situation, and it didn't work out. Danbury, Connecticut was a Cirrus perspective going into kind of a dark hole night approach, and this is a recreation of X-Plane's version of the terrain of a plane, please play, of a plane going into Danbury, Connecticut, runway 26. And you can see that in real life, you wouldn't see the blue lights quite as bright as this, but you can see the airport. He's on a base turn. He kind of overshoots the final approach course. Oops. So he'll turn back. Thank you. There's a little jitter in the data because the recording isn't filtered the same way you experience it in the aircraft. Yeah, so he's lined up, going in for final approach. Damn, what was that? He hits an obstruction light that's supposed to light a hill 100 feet off the ground, twists the airplane, crashes into a tree, crashes into a house, and he doesn't survive. This is a Cirrus perspective. Brian Heitman pulled out from the simulator, what would that perspective display look like on that position in that approach? Even with synthetic vision, this is a runway that doesn't have highway in the sky, doesn't have an approach, so you're visual. And I don't have synthetic vision, so you'll have to figure out for yourself what really is going on.
That's actually not the obstruction.
Sorry. There's an obstruction sitting in front of it where the runway is. Brian's correcting me that that's not the obstruction, but the point is, even with all of the safety advances, the parachute, the wing cuffs, the electronics and the avionics, you can still get into trouble. Here's the same flight data, but I just changed it to daylight setting so that you could see if it was in daylight and he flew that track, this is what we see he flew at night. He's flown past the course, the final approach course. He's correcting, getting back onto the final approach course. And it's kind of interesting, what would he have seen at night with the runway end indicator lights, which are red, and the obstruction light, which is red, and the terrain, which is dark. And boy, is he low. I mean, these are X-Plains trees, so I don't know whether they're realistic or not, but he's really, really low. So the point about the visualization is we have data that we get from the NTSB's factual reports. I've been working with some of the investigators at both Cirrus and Avidyne to get the data out of the airplanes. And then these kinds of visualizations become useful for CPPP, recurrent training courses, or other discussions about accidents. Unfortunately, that's not the last word. Because after these accidents, it's quite common for litigation to happen. So I sat in on a trial that was the result of a fatal accident crash in Tallahassee in 2008. It took 3.5 years for the trial to begin after the accident occurred in November of 2008. Donald and Victoria Hess were aboard the aircraft. Donald had flown from Buffalo, and the plaintiffs in the case were his 2 surviving daughters, Lura Bechtel Hess and Johana Hess. They retained Arthur Wolk, the Wolk Law Firm, quite a storied plaintiff's attorney in aviation cases. The plaintiffs sued in New York against Cirrus and Sandel, the avionics in the aircraft, BF Goodrich that makes the flux detector that became a key part of the case, and Mid-Continent that makes the digital gyro, and who else? I don't know. Interestingly, the case in New York was split, and Sandel doesn't do business in New York, so they got a judgment to separate them from the case. And a millisecond later, I'm sure, Wolk sued them in California. So it turns out, by coincidence, the trial in California was ready sooner than the trial in New York, and so it proceeded. And the coincidences were San Diego was where they were going to hold the court case, and that's where I live, my hometown. Sandel happens to be the same avionics. I have almost identical avionics to the aircraft that was involved in the crash. This pilot got off course on an ILS approach, and I had something similar happen several years before this, and I'd posted it on the COPA forum. The litigation is often discussed on the COPA forums, and it's quite frustrating not to really be able to understand what are those damn lawyers talking about, and why are we not getting our satisfaction about what we think should be happening? And I was quite simply curious as to what the court process was about a subject that I knew something, and I happened to have some time, so I went. And the opening arguments broke for lunch, and I came back from lunch, and you wait for the courtroom to be opened up, and out in the corridor were all these boxes. These are all the trial exhibits produced by the Wolk Law Firm. You could just write $signs on each one if you'd like. Not only that, in the courtroom they had all this stuff. They brought an airplane to the parking lot next door to the courthouse and actually had the jury come, and I couldn't take pictures of anything in the courtroom. But the parking lot, so this is a Cirrus November 505 Charlie Delta. If you happen to know the owner, he must have gotten a good price from these guys. There's a big screen TV because they walked around and inside the airplane with a video camera showing all the controls and the CAPS handle and the stall horn and all the bits and pieces that they were going to talk about in the case. The chairs, the white chairs, those are for the jury. And the upholstered chairs, those are for the lawyers. There's a sheriff, San Diego County Sheriff, bailiff, watching things, one of the experts. I can see Arthur Wolk in the background there, the court reporter, people from the Hess side of the family, and some of the other attorneys on the plaintiff side when I took this picture. So the accident was a trip from Buffalo to Tallahassee, where the Hesses lived in Buffalo, and they were going to visit their sister and attend a football game in Tallahassee. A little bit of, we need to be there for the football game. The pilot had 17.5 hours of total time, 17.5 hours of time in type in an SR22. He'd bought the plane 5 weeks earlier. And this trip was going to have extensive IMC. The pilot, however, had 700 hours of total time. He previously owned a Piper Archer and had flown it with similar Garmin avionics to what was in the Cirrus. Interestingly, it was a two-leg flight. This is the first leg, departing Buffalo, intending to land at Nashville. No, we're not going to Nashville. We'll go to Lincoln, near Cincinnati. No, we're not going to Lincoln. We're going to go to Port Columbus. So this is an interesting, just what's the mindset of traveling a long 7-hour trip, and right away you're making 3 diversions. And it never came out in the trial, and I never did determine what the reasons were for those 3 diversions. But what was interesting is on that approach into Port Columbus, it was an IMC approach, IFR flight plan. There's a point in there where you see a little dip in the recorded data where the airspeed drops, at least we believe that. The only data we have is from a Garmin 496, and it records only ground speed. But there's this dip in altitude by 300 feet and a change in heading by 60 degrees. And the test pilot testifying for the defense called that post-stall gyration. You get into a stall, the wing drips, you change direction, you get recovered. And that happened. What are you doing that on an approach? This is not standard procedure. So the defense expert is claiming that this pilot was behind the airplane. Speed got slow, the plane dropped the wing, turned, lost altitude, pilot recovered. On the Port Columbus to Tallahassee leg, they departed IFR, they filed direct to Tallahassee, and you can see, yep, GPS navigation, generally a straight line. Oops, there's a little bit of weather, and he navigated around that in the upper Georgia area. He did the approach for runway 27 into Tallahassee. It's an ILS. He'd been flying for 4.5 hours. There was some concern among us about how much fuel he'd have after a 7-hour flight. I mean, a 7-hour day, 4.5-hour flight. And the weather was low IMC, 400 overcast, 10 miles visibility. This is the approach into Tallahassee. The yellow line is the recorded data. And it shows he's coming in from the north on a vector, 210, then heading 240, join the localizer. As soon as he crosses the final approach fix at Gassid, all of a sudden the plane turns to like heading 320 instead of 270. We don't have a good explanation from any of the recorded data or any of the other things that we have about the accident to figure out why something caused a change in heading of 50 degrees or so. And you can see the plane kind of meanders to the northwest. ATC is on the radio. This pilot's off course. Turn 240 to re-intercept the localizer. And essentially, he's way off course and ends up descending, gets disoriented, and crashes into that house that you saw in the first picture. Now, the plaintiffs came up with a theory to explain how this accident happened. It's all because of a thing called the flux detector. Back to the future for real. So the flux detector failed in flight, which caused an uncommanded heading change, which the Sandel recognized and goes into a mode to correct the directional gyro. In other words, the magnetic heading is one direction, the gyro another, they're off, and it's going to move the gyro to match. And it does that initially for 4 degrees per second, pretty slow. Actually, I think it may be 4 degrees per minute. It's really slow. After 120 seconds, if they're not in sync, it goes into what's called a fast slave mode at 25 degrees per second. And now, the gyro and the flux detector are in sync. And their theory is that it would rotate both the Sandel display and the MFD in heading up mode. I don't know anybody that flies heading up mode, but that's their theory. The Sandel and the Avidyne both change. That causes the pilot to be what's that all about? He makes 2 attempts to correct. The flux detector is still wobbling around. He's still descending on the approach. And with the descent, and then finally a decision to go around, he accelerates, gets vertigo, disoriented, crashes into the yard. The plane actually hit that car you saw, injured the person who was in the car at the driveway, and another person who was standing nearby. The fatal crash was a wrongful death caused by the Sandel product and its defect, and it's a failure to warn the pilot that something bad was happening. So what's this flux detector? It's a little 3-inch gadget that's mounted inside everyone's cirrus wing. It detects the Earth magnetic flux, the things that make magnetic compasses work. It's calibrated so that it works with the heading and magnetic flux. It's mounted out in the wing, away from other sources of interference that would affect the magnetic heading. And in this instance, it feeds the Sandel. The Sandel then has logic to keep the directional gyro, which is obviously stabilized, correctly magnetically oriented. So where was that flux detector? This is the wing. After the wing hits the car, it's not like you see it on your plane. Here's the flap, kind of separated. The top of the wing has completely separated from the spar and the bottom of the wing, and they're in different places behind the car. The aileron is lying underneath the top piece of it's not attached where it's supposed to be. And the wingtip has been broken off. So the wreckage is kind of spewed around this front yard where it had hit the car. Another shot in the NTSB archives, the public docket, shows a different view, someone standing right behind the car taking a picture. And now you can see there's the wing top, completely delaminated from the spar and the rest of the wing. The aileron and the wingtip. Where's the flux detector? It's supposed to be in the wing, right? Mounted to something fairly rigid in the wing. I've never seen it, but it's accessible through one of the inspection panels. It's sitting there on the ground. One of the investigators commented about this was a walkover piece of wreckage. It wasn't something that jumped out as this is the reason that caused the accident. And oh, by the way, it really must have been violently separated from that in the wreckage to get where it is. I mean, it's no longer mounted. It's pretty separated mechanically. So the defense has a counter theory. This pilot was not competent, not proficient, and not current to make this flight. In competency, he only had 17.5 hours of cirrus time after doing what the defense people called the VFR cirrus transition. During that transition, looking at his logbook and the recorded data, you can see he had some difficulties. Well, you sort of expect that in training, and you sort of expect someone to get better. But his instructor talked about you shouldn't fly an IMC in this new cirrus until you do more instrument training. Notably, he did not get an instrument of proficiency check in his logbook in his new cirrus. Proficiency, he got a CSIP instructor, did the transition, but the instructor's comment during deposition in preparation for the trial, what do you think about this pilot's capabilities? Oh, he wasn't proficient. I told him, don't fly an IMC until you get more instrument training. And currency. Did this pilot have the required approaches and experience to be legal to fly under the currency requirements for instrument flight? Since he didn't have all of those things, he wasn't legal to fly an IMC on the day of the accident, so says the defense. So when you have one of these trials, it's civil litigation. There's no, you can't call the pilot. That's an unfortunate deceased. So the solution is you call experts that interpret volumes of data. So there's pilot experts, Robert Allen Rivers versus Robert Hoot Gibson. They're both, by coincidence, equipped with resumes that include NASA. Robert Allen Rivers was a NASA test pilot. He actually brought the first NASA-purchased SR22 from Duluth to Langley, where the NASA people flew it and did various tests. Hoot Gibson is a shuttle astronaut and over the years commanded at least 3 shuttle flights and was the chief astronaut for NASA. So you've got this battle of 2 NASA experts about the pilot's actions. In accident reconstruction, Robert Allen Rivers did the accident reconstruction testimony, and Larry Grandy did the testimony for the defense. The flux detector, curiously, the flux detector expert was someone who was very familiar with the previous HSI in the Cirrus that some SR-20s still have, the Century and SD-1000, versus the flux detector design executive who was responsible for the product program in the 90s and the early 2000s. The plaintiffs brought in a weather expert and a radar expert, and the defense didn't have an opposing defense expert for those. The plaintiffs brought in a software expert, this guy Chapman, who testified about how the software in the Sandel was changed to eliminate a warning. It was very compelling testimony. I'm a software guy, and I thought, you know, if I was in the jury and I wasn't that technically astute, that would be a very compelling story. He was unopposed. Turns out Sandel never put one of their employees to testify about the product, its capabilities, how defects were handled, and so forth. And since this is a wrongful death case, and there are damages involved, there were 2 competing experts on economics, loss of economic benefits, stock options that Donald Hess was due, and inheritance calculations, and so forth. So you have these conflicting perspectives. The plaintiff goes first, there's some cross-examination, then the defense gets their time, they put up their experts, there's some cross-examination. It takes weeks to get sort of this rebuttal to play out. So you've really got these 2 theories, a mechanical fault versus pilot error. And the plaintiffs, as you saw, spent huge dollars to put this case in front of the jury. The metallurgist described the flux detector damage. It's got some coils, and it's got a magnetic coils, and it's got a screw that holds it all together. And they opened it up and saw, this is all broken. Must have failed in flight. They never quite mentioned the pictures I showed you. Constructed a test box so that they could fly a flux detector in a Cirrus SR22, and then in the back seat, they could just move it. I mean, you can't do the thing on the wing, right? That's kind of bolted in, and by the way, you'd need it to fly. But they could switch it so that the Sandel would get the reading from this test box. And then as you fly along, oh, let's simulate what happens if it fails. Twist. And indeed, just like they said, it spins the Sandel screen, and the pilot, well, this pilot was Robert Allen Rivers, so he wasn't confused, but they demonstrated that the pilot could have. They flew 5 test flights, videotaped each of them, and wanted to present that as evidence in front of the jury. They constructed an instrument panel. They had a Sandel, you know, the full 6-pack. They had an Avidyne MFD. They had a Garmin stack with the audio panel and the 2 Garmin 430 navigators and the transponder and the autopilot. They had the whole damn thing in the courtroom, mocked up so they could push buttons, and then in the courtroom they could spin the flux detector and show, see, the Sandel twists. Hence, the pilot got confused. And they just demonstrated that failure to the jury. So this was a lot of effort. In contrast, the pilot competency issue was mainly around the transition training. And importantly, it was about this pilot did not do an IPC. He didn't have instrument training. He only concentrated on the VFR tasks and some IFR tasks. I mentioned already the instructor deposition. He was in New York and not someone they could compel to fly to California to testify. And there was a whole rigmarole about instructor having misrepresented his flying experience, and the plaintiffs were trying to discredit the expert witness, or the instructor witness. And they went through the just anomalies that I mentioned, like the post-stall gyration and the departure. The departure. This is a really interesting glimpse into if something weird happens in your flight, there can be lots of different interpretations if you're not around to explain what happened. The situation is, this is the second leg. We're going to take off from Port Columbus. We're going to go to Port Tallahassee. Clearance. I'm flying, November 827 Golf Mike. I'd like my clearance. And ATC clears 827 Golf Mike to Tallahassee. Expect radar vectors, Victor 493, York VOR, direct. Climb and maintain 6,000, expect 10,000 at 10 minutes after departure. When he gets in the air, he gets a departure instruction. Fly heading 150, join Victor 493. So I've depicted on here, in a blue line, the clearance. A radar vector to Victor 493 that goes from Appleton to York. Oops, it has a dog leg. Turns out there's a military operations area in the IFR airway bends around the MOA. And so this point called road is the bend in the airway. Pilot's flying along. ATC makes a comment that he's about to approach the airway. No change. No change in heading, no joining the air. ATC, you're 4 miles past the airway. Pilot, I don't understand. So that's about what was presented to the jury. And so Hoot Gibson, as the pilot expert for the defense, points out, this is a pilot who's not flying proficiently on a departure clearance. And so there's an interesting explanation by the plaintiffs. Well, this was a proficient pilot with a great amount of expertise or experience, 700 total hours. And he was expecting to fly that clearance direct, 493 direct to York VOR. So that meant he was flying to intercept the inbound radial on Victor 493 to the York VOR, the yellow line. They actually drew it during the court. It was kind of fun. Well, you've got a pen? And they drew it on their overhead projector. That yellow line that goes up into the box, what ATC says in their transcript. He's a competent pilot, but he was confused by an ambiguous clearance. Hoot Gibson says there's nothing ambiguous about this. Robert Allen Rivers said this is a confusing clearance. They interpreted it to mean fly expect radar vectors to intercept the inbound radial to York VOR direct. And it's like, okay, I've never heard that before, but when you listen to it, it's presented by obviously an aviation knowledgeable expert being questioned by an obviously aviation expert attorney, it sort of makes sense. Except I'm sitting there, no, please, let me speak. Oh, and during the closing arguments, the plaintiff's attorney actually said ATC didn't understand their own clearance. So obviously this is a pilot who's proficient and competent, and it's ATC. Not good. So what about that currency thing? This is a page from Donald Hess's logbook. They get all of that stuff in the court case. And so you see he had a couple of flights. The first line is a departure. Why am I saying that? The first line is a Piper Archer, and then everything else is an SR22 going through transition training, and then a couple of flights just before he takes off to go to Tallahassee. So you look, there are a bunch of flights in which instrument approaches are logged. Total of them, 9 in 4 weeks, but only 2 of them have actual IMC, and none of them have any indication of a simulated IMC with a view-limiting HUD. So the plaintiffs explain that by saying the requirements in FAR 61.57 is that you fly 6 instrument approaches in the past 6 months that includes holding procedures and tracking inbound courses. And instrument procedures include holding procedures. And tracking courses is part of how you fly instrument procedures. So if you log an instrument procedure, an instrument approach, you've done all of the holding and the inbound courses. Jerry, you're not supposed to shake your head. You're supposed to be impressed. This is not clearly a satisfactory juror. There's no mention of the actual IMC requirement or the simulated instrument time requirement. And on cross-examination, the plaintiff's expert said, well, you know, we saw the picture earlier where the pilot was wearing a baseball cap, and that's sufficient as a view-limiting device. You know, you just sort of keep your head down. The final approach into Tallahassee, I showed you before, is charted in the yellow lines, and there was quite a fascinating discussion about the localizer fan. Localizer fan. Even the judge got into the joke. He wanted the behavior of the attorneys to get into the localizer fan because they were kind of getting a little unruly. It was very fascinating that the judge would pick up on the jargon and the way to use it correctly. So here's the yellow course, and you can see the localizer is by design limited to 2.5 degrees either side of the course line, and your instruments will show you CDI, you know, 1 dot, 2 dot, 3 dot, until it gets to full deflection at 2.5 degrees off the localizer. Hoot Gibson did an excellent job of explaining that to the jury. He's a fabulous testifier, or he does a good job in front of the jury. And furthermore, when you're outside the localizer fan, your instrument is pegged with that needle, you know, sort of the crosshairs for flying the ILS. Well, if you're outside the localizer fan, it stops. And then if you're flying in the clouds with that as your reference for navigation, you don't know where you are. So who did a good job of explaining that? How did the plaintiffs explain the explanation? Well, they pulled out the FAA Instrument Flying Handbook. That became an exhibit in the trial. Instrument Flying Handbook talks about the localizer, and its fan is 35 degrees out to 10 miles, 17.5 degrees on each side. So this pilot was clearly within the localizer fan, not on the fan, but you know, sort of in the signal reception for that navigation. Unfortunately, nobody pointed out to the jury that even with the 35 degrees, the pilot was outside that. So not only do you have this needle so that you don't know where you are, you might not even get valid signals that far away from the localizer. There was a piece of the trial that talked about the use of caps. That was really depressing for me. I've been talking about caps for how long? So NASA, apparently, I didn't know this, NASA had an operational practice that all the test pilots that flew the SR22 flew with the cap safety pin in. All right, how many people fly with the pin in here? No hands. Three NASA pilots flew the SR22 with the pin in by their conventional practice. And, oh, by the way, defense did get him to admit that it does say in the Cirrus checklists, pre-flight and before taxi, before takeoff, verify that the pin is removed. So there was, I mean, they were just not following the checklists provided by Cirrus. The plaintiffs pointed out, you know, that POH, you get into a Cirrus and you have this parachute behind you, severe injury or death. Expect the loss of the airframe. And you have to activate it above 2,000 feet. And the defense actually brought a Cirrus employee to testify. You know, sort of, does it work? Yes. Does it work 2,000 feet or lower? Yes. But that's the recommendation. Is that the limitation? No limitation. Very effective rebuttal, except you never quite know how the emotion about you're flying with a bomb over your head was actually one of the phrases in the closing argument. Oh, I skipped over. That 2,000 foot recommended deployment altitude, The final approach fix into Tallahassee is at 1,800 feet. So Arthur Wolk scores points with the jury by saying, you know, if he's going to pull the parachute, he'd have to decide to do that before he joins the final approach course and crosses the final approach fix. And it's like, darn. So the COPA wisdom about the parachute works 400 feet wings level. A little different than, yeah, well, once you pass the final approach fix, you're no parachute. But we know it works. We know that it works above 400 feet in level flight. We know that it's worked at 168 knots indicated, 171 knots indicated, 187 knots indicated, 190 knots indicated. Last year when I told you I only had 2 of those 4 numbers. Isn't it nice to get recorded data? We actually have the data that gives us a good idea of how fast some of these parachute pulls the airframe was moving. So I've recently updated to add the 171 and 190. Yahoo! 0 fatalities. So this is for us. 0 fatalities when you're in a Cirrus and it's been pulled less than 133 knots airspeed and below 1,000 feet. So what happened in this jury trial? The verdict, there's a defect. Sandel's defect contributed to the accident. The damages for loss of economic benefits, technical term in New York civil trial damages, $1.04 million. The responsibility split between pilot 35%, Sandel 65%. Damages for loss of inheritance, they already had the inheritance and the jury decided they get nothing extra. Loss of stock options, big controversy, $160,000 instead of $9.6 million. So the IPO price would have been, they thought, $200, and the economists thought it was 20 bucks. An interesting term that I'd never heard of before, but there's a damage for fear of death, which loosely said is when you're about to die, that's the bad feeling. And there's a dollar amount associated with that bad feeling. But the responsibility for that was assigned 65% to Sandel and 35% to the flux detector manufacturer. Whew. Lessons that I learned, and I've had numerous conversations with people who have read the post about it. Lawsuits, they're not investigations. They're not looking for the whole truth, nothing but the truth. They're looking for what the jury sees and hears, only what each side presents as evidence. How you present it makes that evidence more compelling, perhaps, but essentially it's the answers to all the questions which are the facts on which the jury is to decide. The evidence, then, is the key. Emotion plays into it, and Arthur Wolk made them cry. Closing argument, I cried. No, don't laugh. I mean, Donald Hess was a very accomplished, brilliant guy, very successful at his businesses, very philanthropic, and it's a tragedy that that family was disrupted that way. It was emotional for me to sit through this and then to realize we're really talking about Laura and Joanne's parents. That's bad. They're not here anymore. What's worse is they were flying a Cirrus with the pin in, and they could have survived. That really, really got to me. The costs are just simply staggering. How much preparation, how much the experts get in all of this. I really came away with an appreciation for how big a deal it is about the human factors in flying our airplanes. Way underestimated its importance, way undervalued in our current system. And I've had some interesting conversations about the design of avionics systems and their integration in our planes. So manufacturers do have a responsibility because they make those kinds of integrated design decisions. But it's us, it's the pilots. Here's a still-bring statistic. 94% of the probable causes that have been determined in all the Cirrus accidents are pilot causes. It's not the plane. It's not the weather. It's not mechanicals. It's what we do in those bad situations. So COPA can and will do more. I was going to leave time for questions here, but I'm on a roll, so I'm just going to keep going. I'd like to introduce the new bumper sticker, CAPS Works, or Shoot Works. Thank you. So the next piece I want to talk about is the National Transportation Safety Forum, the GA Safety Forum. The NTSB called this together, and they had a fatal accident among one of the NTSB staff members just a few weeks before this forum. And they made the point, they've been making the point, for those guys, the people working at the staff at the NTSB, they fly GA. Many of them are EAA members, and they're kit builders that are flying planes they built themselves, or the restorers, or they just fly certified aircraft. Unlike the improvements in commercial aviation, general aviation accident rates they're stable. They're just not yielding to all the innovations. And the past efforts by the NTSB to deal with weather and glass cockpits are not yielding much effect either. They claim GA accidents are preventable, duh, with 94% of the probable causes in the planes that we fly. This is pretty evident. It's about us. And they came up with this challenge. True change comes from a change in the culture. And on COPA, we've talked about some of the resistance that people have to that change. NTSB did a good job. This is a couple of their slides in showing general aviation is not like commercial aviation. It's all of these weird things like balloons, paragliders, corporate jets, and us, the personal and business flying. This chart on accident rates made headlines in Business Week and Bloomberg, carried around the press. The fatal accident rate and the GA accident rate overall has not gone down. But look what personal flying has done in the last 10 years. It's gone up 20%, the accident rate. The accident rate in personal flying has gone up 20% in 10 years. It's kind of like the flying activity goes down and we're still crashing the same number of planes. When you look at fatal accident rates, it gets a little more scary because not only are personal flying rates going up, so are business rates. Now, maybe that's because more people are flying for business given the airline situation, I don't know. The NTSB put on what I'll consider a very effective range of issues by having panels of speakers talk about each of these topics. Safety programs, the role of instructions, training programs, weather, and how that helps or hinders pilots in the cockpit. They actually had a session on maintenance, but primarily aged aircraft. Certification issues, Tim Timmerman from Cirrus was invited to speak on that. And finally, advanced avionics, which everybody agreed. Gee, the pace of innovation in general aviation is way better than commercial aviation. Okay, if the innovation's better, where's the results? And that was one of the things coming out of the NTSB study on glass cockpits. Listening to these experts, I kind of felt kind of puffed up on behalf of all of you because COPA got mentioned several times. COPA, we got mentioned by these experts on, none of us, except Tim Timmerman, were associated with Cirrus aircraft. But there were the people in the instructor corps, there were the people in the safety programs, the American Bonanza Society, Tom Turner spoke. They have 300 participants on average in their Bonanza pilot proficiency program. And they reported that Cirrus pilots who attend the Cirrus pilot proficiency program have an 80% reduction than non-participants. And that kind of got people's attention. You could see the body language. There's a result. That's about what you do. If you attend these things, results matter. And oh, by the way, we've had one fatal with a CPPP participant in the last 33 fatal accidents. It really is a tiny number. And we've had 3 total in the last 4 years. So CPPP participants just simply don't show up very often. Risk management. Bob Wright, some of you know, former FAA Director of General Aviation. he spoke and was very complimentary about the work in the critical decision-making seminar that Mason had started and that Carol continues, that COPA members, can we get a few more people to go so that the story gets better? But at least the history is really impressive, that we take an interest in risk management, risk mitigation, talking about it in both the CPPP and the CDM. And when they talked about weather, you know, we have a wealth of weather information at the CPPP thanks to Jerry Seckler and to Bill Frank, and before them, Scott Denstead. We have people on the forum that contribute weather information about possible flights and accidents. It's really something that made me realize we're already doing this stuff. That made me feel good. Because they talked about this culture of safety permeating the comments by the panel members, which probably was a response to the expectation that NTSB had that, come on, you're going to tell us how this culture of safety is really important. And of course, the panel members played that back. At Embry-Riddle University, their aviation department really hit the ball out of the park. I have a background of doing Malcolm Baldrige Quality Award applications in my former life. And for a presenter from Embry-Riddle to talk about the results they've seen in their aviation department in Florida was really quite spectacular. They look at every incident, odd thing that happens, as an opportunity to learn. They treat their aviation students as professionals when they walk in. And they expect them to report stuff and to analyze stuff and to fix stuff, just as a culture of acknowledging safety is important. And they get results. Their accident claims, their accident efforts have really gone down. And when people were talking about this culture, COPA came to mind. And so I started thinking about what could we say about what we do. And then it became apparent that there's an opportunity to send them a briefing paper on all these topics. So that's in development of what could we say about how to impact the general aviation accident rates. Because we can highlight the safety activities we're doing, we can talk about the results, we can describe the accident discussions on the COPA forums, we can talk about the CPPP revitalization that the CPPP instructors have led for the last several years. We can talk about the risk mitigation. Interesting, not just risk assessment, but do something. The risk mitigation, like don't go, like divert, like climb higher, like do something. And we can request the NTSB more timely and complete in providing information to the COPA community so that we can get a better understanding of what did happen. It's like those visualizations changed the conversation about Danbury, because we could see this guy was really, really low in a really dark airport. So the current state of the COPA safety culture, I posit, includes, we talk about ownership and how to make the best use of your airplanes. We talk about pre-flight decision-making in the critical decision-making courses. We talk about in-flight decision-making at the Cirrus Pilot Proficiency Program. We recognize safety participation by the FAA Wings credit that we give out, as well as the little badges on the COPA forum. We have materials that accumulate from the Cirrus Pilot magazine, from our new member brochures that talk about safety, the COPA Code of Conduct, pieces that we've worked on to make this stuff live beyond just the moment when you're talking to somebody. We've collaborated with key suppliers, Cirrus, Avidyne, Nation Air Insurance, and they have an impact on how we look at what we're trying to do. And we have safety-oriented gatherings. And I'll even make the claim, when you fly to the Bahamas on one of the COPA trips, how valuable is it to have the planning of making both the trip to Florida and the trip from Florida to the Bahamas with the advice and the guidance of people that have done it before and done it safely. So I'd like to spend a moment, Craig, this is your point, and I'd like to recognize safety activities in the room. Sorry, those on the internet cannot participate. What Craig has are some gift certificates to the Cirrus Connection booth, across the way in the exhibit hall. They close at 3 o'clock. And courtesy of Cirrus Aircraft, we have a few to give out. And I'd like to do that by recognizing people that are distinguished. So for instance, who among you have more than, pick a number, 2,000 hours flying in an SR22? Stand up. Stand up. How many people have more than 2,000 hours in a Cirrus SR22? Congratulations. No, 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 no. Michael Bush up here is already conceding defeat. How many people have more than 3,000 hours? Oh. Oh. Wait, Arnhem? How many hours do you have? 7,200 hours, SR2X. The flip side of that one. Who has fewer than 100 hours in a Cirrus aircraft? Stand up. Stand up. So thank you for your commitment to come to an event like this. All right. How many people of those that were standing have less than 50 hours? Oh, I forgot to ask this. Whoa. That have a private pilot's license, not just student. Oh, we're making progress here. Less than 50 hours? I mean, yeah, less than 50 hours. In a Cirrus, SR22. Now we got 3 people standing, 4 people standing. All right, where do we go next? How many have you got? 31. 23. 40. All right, the 23 wins. Your name, please? Oh, well, in that case, thank you for hearing correctly. 21 hours. For those of you who know Dave Bushman, he's not going to win this next one. Who's attended the most CPPPs? Those people that have attended 5 or more. Ooh, look at this. Dave Bushman would win. He'd gone to 13. We've only been doing it for 9 years. How many, Michael? 7. Dennis? 5? 5? 7. Oh, we've got 2. Oh, in the back? 5, you can sit. All right, so Michael and Ted, thank you. This is fun. Who has done a private check ride in a Cirrus SR20, SR22? Anyone? 1, 2. How long ago? 3, 4. How long ago, Mike? 7 years private. Amal? October, how many months is that? 8? 2.5 years, you can sit. We're already at October. 5 years, you can sit, Phil. Did I have one more at the back? All right, October wins. All right, so Mike, you might get on this one. Who has done their instrument check ride in a Cirrus SR22? Woo! Yes! All right, most recently. If it's more than a year, that's good. All right, Phil, when did you do yours? 4 years ago. TJ? 6 years ago. Yes! Dale, when we were discussing giving these out, made a comment about the kinds of ratings you get after you know how to, or when you know how to fly, have an impact on your safety in a Cirrus. So how many people have seaplane ratings? Wow, I guess that's the thing to get in your checkbook, huh? A checkbook. Boy, that's a bunch of people. All right. How many people have gotten it within the last year? Oh, good. We've got one person within the last year, and it's our Carol Buncham Jensen at Oshkosh last July. And Dale's favorite is the tailplane rating. Oops. I ain't got one. How many people have tail wheel endorsements in their logbook?
How many got it for Cirrus?
That, for the internet folks, the joke was, how many people got it at a Cirrus? How many people got it within the last year? Whoa. Oh, 2 years then. Got a tail wheel. Sorry, Dale, people think this is a good thing to get a long time ago. Did anybody get it in the last 2 years? Uh-oh. 3 years? Kurt, when did you get yours?
June 3 years ago.
June 3 years ago? That's more recent. Oh, we have one at the back? Yes, please. All right. Flip a... All right. I'm not sure what's happening. Craig, you do it. The point about the recognition is it's more than simply going to courses. It's actually how you practice your safety commitment. And these gift certificates were intended to recognize continued experience in flying aircraft. One of the amazing things for me is the participation in the discussions in the COPA forum. The most viewed topics recently, that is in the last few months, 7 of the top 10 threads are unquestionably safety related. And that's with like more than 10,000 views each. That's a lot of lurkers. The most viewed posts of all time. It's amazing what you can do with a database that you can sort this way. The most viewed posts of all time, 9 of the top 20 with more than 15,000 views are all safety related. Interestingly, the Zurich, Switzerland accident was posted on the guest forum and it's got a huge number of views. And then Crystal Lake, the VFR and IMC accident. Dick, your caps pull in the Bahamas was very highly discussed. Chapel Hill, North Carolina, Deb Markwood was the widow in that and became an active participant in the discussions. Scottsdale, Arizona was a recent stall spin accident in traffic. The observing lawsuit, very highly viewed. The Boulder, Colorado midair and the tragic scene of a video of the plane descending under canopy on smoke and fire. The Matthias, West Virginia caps pull after disorientation, and the tragedy of one of our COPA members, Manfred Stolle at Moncks Corner, South Carolina. Those were very highly rated in terms of views. Most posted, so lots of people view it, most posts. 11 of the top 10 had more than 300 posts on it, all about safety stuff. Well, sorry, Dennis, some of the posts are related to safety. But it's fascinating how much vigor this community has. And when I talk to other people from other parts of the aviation world, they compliment COPA when they've read these things about how vigorous and skilled the discussions are. Importantly, that we've shifted from the early days when it would be, what a stupid thing to do. And there would be passing judgment and assigning blame for what that pilot did. And we've shifted that. Several people, Gordon, Kurt, others, have been helping moderate the discussion to things more focused on what can we learn? If this situation happened to us, as we know the facts or as we are speculating about what might have happened, how would we handle that? And that's a really rich place for exploration about how your personal flying might change. And by the way, when we talk to people that have been involved in situations, I was thinking about the parachute, or I actually pulled the parachute. And exploring these scenarios, the exploration and the way in which we take the information to do something with it is really fascinating. The expertise that COPA members bring to those discussions is phenomenal. When I started making a list, thinking about how I'm going to say this to the NTSB, we get news reports. People seem to get Google alerts for serious plane crashes like that. They analyze the weather, the flight tracks, the ATC recordings that are on live ATC, the regulations, thank you, Jerry, the procedures, the avionics and the way the equipment works, CAPS decisions that people have argued back and forth, accident reconstructions, instruction tips, and training opportunities. It's amazing how rich, and it's really, really hard. I've tried a couple of times. It's really, really hard to distill that into some pithy, well, you should do this. It's different for so many people, and those accident threads are really rich for good ideas. So the COPA safety culture has a long history and a lot of good results to talk about. What's the desired state? Preaching to the choir, it works. You're all here. COPA members don't show up in accidents very often. CPPP even less often. But how? I mean, everybody else that's not in the choir, it's kind of like in the churchyard. How do you get to those people? How do you reach the unreachable was a phrase used several times in the NTSB forum. We need ideas, we need energy. And so one of the things the COPA board is doing is instituting an application to qualify as a public charity under the IRS regulation 501c3, which means contributions shift from being a personal benefit. Yeah, you go to a CPPP, you get a flight review. Personal benefit for the investment you make in that. Shift from that to a community investment. Tax-deductible contributions can be used to build a set of resources that will benefit not just you, but the whole community. And so COPA's mission for that, I propose, is to invest in building those resources. There's a lot of great expertise. Let's use it to create things that can be delivered to people in need, those that aren't reached now. To expand the opportunities so that more people will participate. And then to do, just as you saw earlier, is to find effective ways. How can we recognize people's commitment to safety? And since this is a volunteer organization, let's structure it in a way so that it's the volunteer leadership, but as you kind of get the idea that a lot of these good ideas take some operational and professional skill to make happen, so let's get the volunteers to lead the ideas and invest in the capability to make it happen. For those of you that are familiar with nonprofits and philanthropic organizations, the 501c3 process is an US-based Internal Revenue Service determination that makes contributions tax deductible for personal income taxes. How many people in the room are actively involved in some 501c3 activities? Yes. So that's the expertise that I'm hoping in the COPA community can be brought to bear on this. Unfortunately, it's a big, daunting process. It's changed in the last few years, and their IRS regulations are really making it clear they want you to prove that you're going to do good. But we can build on our history, our financial performance. A third of the income we get comes from membership dues, a third of the income comes from safety programs, and a third of the income is events like this. So, just to sort of create the awareness, little amounts, big amounts, there are things we can do in the current safety programs pretty easily. $250 is what we pay or what it costs to provide the training materials for CPPP. $250 is about what it costs to run the materials for a partner and command course. $500 to pay for an instructor to facilitate a CDM might be we would make sure that that happens more often. $1,000 would print all the binders for the CPPP in color. $5,000 would be to a set of instructors to come up with a new ground course. $10,000 is sort of the initiation fee of doing things online. And maybe $50,000 or more is what's needed to produce online courses to deliver the kinds of content we've built up. And whenever you talk about philanthropy, it's always desirable to have a big target. Oh, by the way, the American Bonanza Society has a safety foundation with a $3 million endowment. And if you know how endowments work, you get the money, you put it, invest it, and then you work with the investment income that comes from that endowment. So things to mind, what could COPA do? And so this is an opportunity to ask for your support, both for the idea and for the call for volunteers to make this happen. So one of the things that we've talked about is I have, who has the folder? Who did I give it to? Maybe I didn't. Oh, thank you. In the back, I've asked Bill King. Actually, Martin, can you get the microphone for Bill? I've asked, Bill and I were talking last week when I visited the factory, and he got the idea like right away. And so he actually wrote me a check right away. And so I'd like to acknowledge, Bill, your personal involvement and invite you to say some words, and then we have a form that I'd like you to consider. Bill?
Yep, thanks, Rick. We're gonna pass these forms around, and we'd like everybody to seriously consider this. We know that we can move the dial on safety. We know we can make a difference if we can figure out how to fund the right kinds of programs and start driving these programs through not just COPA membership, but beyond, and hopefully then add to the COPA membership as part of this. We know we can make a difference, but it's going to take some money to do it. So as Rick and I were talking about this the other day, we thought, you know what, this is silly. Let's get on this. Let's start it, and let's start it now. So just in the last few days, there's a small group of us that got together, wrote some checks, and have started the investment cycle moving forward. And we're looking for you guys to do the same thing, to contribute and contribute in a significant way, to start putting our own safety program together through COPA that we can drive through our entire pilot population and hopefully feed back in, and we can move this dial, and we know we can make a difference. It's going to take us some money to do it, and we need everybody here to step up and hopefully play a role in that. So we're going to pass around some sheets. Please consider what you can do, and the important thing isn't necessarily that everybody write $1,000 or $10,000 checks. The important thing is that everybody's involved and everybody writes something for a check. So really, what we can do as a group, we can do in a significant way if we can get everybody on board. We're limited on time, so I'll leave it at that. We're going to pass this around. Please consider being part of our Safety Foundation Founders Group, and please consider a significant check to help us fund what we know we want to do and can do. Dale was right when he spoke on Thursday at the Cabana. The biggest threat we have is the accidents. We have to fundamentally change how our pilots operate airplanes and our safety record, or we're going to have a difficult time just surviving, because to win cases is millions of dollars. And we know, I sit in on those. I sat for 5 weeks in Manhattan to win that case. At the end of that case, we had spent many millions of dollars, and I'll leave it at that because I don't want to drive you crazy with these kinds of numbers, but it was multiple millions of dollars just to defend ourselves to win. We can't afford to keep fighting cases. We can't afford to win more cases. So we need to stop having accidents, guys. And we can change, we can move the dial on safety. Consider being a part of it. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. And with that, I'd like you to appreciate that my view is the COPA community learns from these things and shows that it's learned and demonstrates differently. It's a community that shares. There's a great deal of expertise, and it's a community that cares, and it cares in interesting ways. So with that, I'd like to close the safety review. Andy, do we have any time for questions?
Yeah, we got 15 minutes, but Dick McLaughlin, don't go away. We're going to introduce you before we go to break.
Okay, Dick, you got that call? Don't go away. All right, we have time for questions. I'd be happy to spend a couple minutes. Somebody got the microphone handy? Do I see a question? Up here at the front? Run the microphone. All right, ask your question and I'll repeat it.
I want to ask the audience how many have participated on this online instructional program called Pilot Workshop
All right, the question is, how many people have participated in an online course called pilotworkshop.com? Stand up because that's easier to see. Woo! All right, looks like about a dozen.
Well, it's a resource on education.
Microphone, Bill?
Sorry.
Pilotworkshop.com is presented by seasoned educators, pilots from all sorts of general aviation, military aviation, training, FAA, former trainees. And it's an scenario-based training presentation with a very formidable discussion about those scenarios. Some of them are taken off from real accident, others are just made up by them. And then it's followed by a hangar discussion or forum where the participants and quizzes.
Are you recommending we take a look at that?
Well, I am strongly recommended.
Okay.
When you put that survey on who's done training, seaplane and tail dragger and so forth, I think that shows that we just don't want to be proficient in one aircraft, but we want to continue to improve our skill from different areas of aviation. I have done, I have all the ratings in fixed wing and rotor wing, but that doesn't mean I'm a proficient pilot. But this type of organization is there, and I suggest that COPA goes,
We'll go
contact them and see if through our membership we get a great discount and participate.
Thank you. Are there any other questions before we break? Can you get the microphone over to this gentleman, please? Quick, quick. Just talk.
I guess this is a quick question, Rick, but one thing I was considering that I'd like to think about, we have a lot of CSEPs out there that some of them do promote COPA and some of them don't, CSEPs. And wonder if they could be part of being more part of COPA, or Cirrus could help with the CSEP, maybe making sure they're part of COPA and more integrated with COPA, the CSEP program.
One of the things, Hal, that I spend my time is working with people in the Cirrus aircraft training and the accident investigators, obviously. And the whole notion of how to benefit from the relationship between Cirrus, the manufacturer that has a lot of the knowledge that we use, and the CPPP instructors to influence CSIPs so that they have both a better appreciation and, frankly, do a better job of following the training materials that are already out there. On our list. Another comment?
Question, Rick.
Yep.
In the
Scott?
trial you attended, was any aspect of liability whatsoever assigned to the pilot?
Yes, 35%. The loss of economic damages was assigned to the pilot, Donald Hess. In other words, the defense theory had an impact on the jury assignment of responsibility for the accident. Any other questions? What did I think of? Oh, the question from Dick McLaughlin was, what did Rick think, what did I think about the pilot? I've told the story to people. When my engine was off the airplane getting a little bit of work done, I had the opportunity to go fly in a Cirrus that a hangar mate was, but it was a PFD plane and I fly a six-pack. And I decided, you know, I don't have enough confidence in my ability to fly that kind of different avionics. So I come from a mindset, Dick, that I know that I don't know. And somehow I believe this pilot wanted to go visit his sister and attend that football game. He had a new airplane that would get him there. But when did he arrive when the plane got there? Because I think he was behind the airplane, and I think the Sandel avionics, it was enough different that it was a problem. as I listened to the testimony that was presented to me, if I were a determiner of the facts, I would say that pilot did not have the proficiency to be able to make that flight safely. It was a challenging flight, even for someone that knows what they're doing. 400-foot overcast forecast is, you know, you're going to be on your game. So my concern was that that balance of the pilot's contribution of proficiency and competence be a significant part of the judgment, and it turned out that way. Okay? With that, thank you for spending the time. I appreciate it, and thank you for your support.